You guys see it all right?
Yep.
All right. So what I'm going to try to do is just kind of go back a step or two from where we are, because I might eventually build this, and this might be 25 slides long, so I don't want to go back to the beginning. But we remember that, we're dealing with two kingdoms, a spiritual, literal one. And then we talked about, where we were with the signs of his coming, but Jesus had us go study the book of Daniel and learn about the Abomination of Desolation. We really haven't gotten into the Abomination of Desolation yet, Daniel. We've just learned about these parallel passages about the kingdom coming, right, in the context in which Christ comes. So we covered the first part, which is going to be the statue, which is going to be gold, silver, bronze, and clay, and how that rolls out to these four kingdoms, which are called the times of the Gentiles. And the time of the Gentiles is specifically referenced in the book of Revelation. We'll circle back to different stuff once we get to the actual book of Revelation. Now we're going to go through the next couple of parables about these four nations that complete this times of the Gentiles. So the next one is going to be in the reign of Belshazzar, I think that's right, Belshazzar, and I believe he's Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. I think he had a son that doesn't really get talked about much, and then his grandson took over. And this grandson would be the one who was there when the writing on the wall happened, and then the kingdom of Babylon is sacked. So that's kind of your context. So there's some common sense things that we're going to think about when we go to these, because the next two prophecies Daniel has are in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. And they're really about 2 years apart, but they're both under Belshazzar. And they're going to have some common elements to them, but they're going to build off, like all Daniel's prophecies build off each other. And this is kind of a theme that you want to kind of understand if you're studying prophecy. If you understand, it's like you can actually interpret the whole Bible just out of the creation account in Genesis 1. And that's something now I do. I think a little bit at the end of the book, but I did at the end of my prophecy Bible study, and I'll probably do at the end of this, just to take all the stuff that we've talked about, and then just have you guys, I'll take the book of Esther or like the book of Genesis, and just try to get something that you wouldn't think is eschatological and go, what is that talking about? And there's all these different types and patterns you're going to be trained to now kind of sense and look for. And the way God reveals prophecy is it's like me telling you, this is what's going to happen, right? And he gives you something, and he's literally telling you things where it's just God's looking at all of our time, which, according to the Bible, I believe we're going to have basically a 7,000 year history, right? And he looks at that entire 7,000 years, and he's like, I'm going to do this and this and this. And he doesn't stop and go, I'm going to do this, and then 1,400 years later, I'm going to do this. And then 1,685 years after that, I'm going to do this. He just says, I'm going to do this and this and this, right? Right. And then he keeps coming back and putting another layer on top of it that kind of fills in some of the gaps. And what we're always doing with prophecy is looking to go, all right, where does that fit in with what he already said, knowing that sometimes God splits it up. He's just saying this and this and this. And you might figure out well, all of that's going to fit between this and this, or part of it's going to be here and part of it's going to be here. And that's what we're always trying to do. But when you get down to it, one of the things that God is pretty consistent about is being chronological in order when he's revealing something, so that when you're laying stuff down, it's how bricks lay down, and you have one layer and then the other layer is in between, and then the next layer is in between those, and it actually fits better and better and better the more you learn. And typically that's, if you go from the Bible to Genesis to Revelation, he does that pretty consistently. And if you get to the time, by the time you've studied all the prophets and then you go and study Revelation, you realize it's oh, this is the synopsis view of all these other prophecies he's had. And it's every single prophecy, every single point he makes in Revelation has you could spread it out. You could almost unfold it into this prophecy in Jeremiah or this prophecy in Micah, or spread little pieces of it around and realize it's he just put it in a nice, succinct little package for you and goes, here's your cliff notes of all of Bible prophecy, right? Everything that's yet to come. So I want you guys to keep that in mind, Daniel, because Daniel sticks to that pattern very well in the way he lays out his prophecies, and that's going to kind of set your mind for an understanding of other types of prophecies as you go forward into Micah or Zechariah or whatever. So Tyson, you seem to be our chief reader here. Do you want to stick to it?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so let's we're starting in Daniel 7. And I'll try to be a little bit quicker than last time. I think these ones, like I said, we laid down a pretty good foundation. So I think we'll get through these pretty quick, and they've got some pretty strong similarities to them. So let's start with just one, and then down to 14. How about?
Cool. Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. And the four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of its four wings of a fowl. The beast had also four heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had a great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garments was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed.
Okay. So before we get into, because he's actually, I think it's going to be an angel that comes by and starts to explain the stuff to him, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Just looking at that on its surface, what do we have here? What did he dream?
This basically the same kingdoms that he had when King Nebuchadnezzar had his dream with the man with the golden head, but these are now parallels as to those kingdoms being beasts
instead of the forms of the gold, right?
Exactly.
And like the metals that were involved, what was the main emphasis point of that?
Well, it was basically the highest value was the head, and each next kingdom that came after, the value of each metal diminished.
Right. And typically as the value went down, what happened to the strength?
Strength of the king.
Right. Right. So we look at gold and silver being very precious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then we look at bronze and iron being, well, we define ages, right, by the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Why is that? You guys ever heard those terms in history?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you know why they called the Bronze Age the Bronze Age?
Nope.
That was actually the main metal that they used for weapons. And the Iron Age is when they got into iron. You can start look up Bronze Age weapons, and they're nice looking weapons. They're really shiny, and it was a metal that you could work with. But iron was just so much stronger than bronze. And the technology to heat iron and to really work it like you could with bronze, you needed a lot higher heat, and basically you needed to get your metallurgical technology amped up to the point where you could work with iron. But once you could just cut right through a bronze sword with it. So, I like one of the things, if you remember this in the Book of Judges, is like how much of a big deal it was that the Philistines had iron weapons. Remember that? So it was such a big deal that Samson was so strong he could bend an iron spear, right? Like it was like, because if your stuff was bronze, they'd tear you up. You clash your swords and yours would just break. So so anyways, that was kind of the theme of that, is that as the centralization of power and authority diminished, the actual strength of the kingdom in terms of what it accomplished actually grew, right? So we know, for instance, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom only really lasted 3 generations, right? I mean, once he had it, you had Nebuchadnezzar down to his grandson, right? But then the Persian kingdom was like something like 6 or 7 kings, and that lasts for quite a bit longer. And then the Greek kingdom started out with Alexander, but with all the kingdoms, that lasted actually quite a bit longer. And then the Roman kingdom came, and that actually lasted quite a bit longer. But it was, the power was less consolidated, so it was considered a less valuable kingdom. So one of these things is we want to establish this precedent here. When he says beast, what does he mean? What does a beast represent?
Men.
Why do you say men?
Like kings. I think it represents a king.
Okay. What do you think, Tyson?
There was a verse, Mike, you might be able to remember, like, because I was going to say the same thing, beast, like, where something about men being beasts.
Mm-hmm.
But I would go with the men aspect.
Okay, so I know what you're talking about. That's in I think Ecclesiastes, where he said, "I looked under all things under the sun and saw that men were like beasts." Right.
Right.
I will say this, is that if these are matching up with the other 4 kingdoms we were talking about, the assumption that you want to have is that these beasts are the kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's something that leads us to indicate there's something about a specific man. Okay, so for instance, this little horn pops up. That's something different than the whole beast, right?
Right.
It's like a horn on the beast. So, but what you're doing is just like the other ones, we're talking about the overall value and strength of the kingdom. This is actually talking about characteristics of the kingdom and what the kingdom does. So, think of it like this: a beast is active, right? Whereas a statue's inactive, right? So it's like the statue's talking about what it is. This is talking about what it does. So if we let's just look at this first one just on its face. It was like a lion and had eagle's wings, and the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon feet as the man, and a man's heart was given to it. What does anything strike your mind as that being like something else you read?
Nebuchadnezzar basically repenting.
Right.
When I see that a man's heart was given to it, when Nebuchadnezzar was in the beast, I mean, well, he was,
He
judged.
went beast mode, didn't he? Though.
Yeah, he did go beast mode, and then he repented.
Right. So just a little education on your Middle Eastern culture.
Mm-hmm.
In the Middle East and in Babylon in particular, but also in like Persia as well, the image of a lion was kind of like a kingly. I mean, this is kind of everywhere. It's like a kingly kind of beast, right? Even Solomon had lions coming off his throne and stuff like that. Whereas eagle's wings kind of represents spiritual or heavenly power. So you would see these motifs. I want to show you. So remember, he's getting this in the Babylonian Empire, and he's giving it to the Jews. Oops. See how this is like a common motif to surround put wings around your deity or whatever. So this is actually Assyria. But you see a lot of these things where it's just like you have different animals represented with wings, and typically the animal itself is going to represent some kind of characteristics or the god himself, and then the wings are obviously like angels' wings type of thing, but represents like their godhood, and it's almost like they reflect the rays of the sun. And so this is actually an old motif of Nimrod or Asher, like the Assyrians just called him Asher. This is like the Middle Eastern predecessor of like Osiris. You often would see him with a bow, but he's going to have these wings around him, right? And so the wings really represent his deity. The lion kind of represents, it's the king of the beast, right? He's always been considered the king of the beast, and he often represents royalty, okay? So what you have is royalty meeting deity, okay? So think about Nebuchadnezzar's empire now. What did Nebuchadnezzar do? Remember?
He made people worship him.
Right, like God, right?
Mm-hmm. And as in that previous dream that he had, he was called the King of Kings. So that would make sense for the lion part.
Right. And so just like, I mean, of all these beasts, even though they're all powerful beasts in their own right, the lion is the king of the beasts, and it always has been in man's estimation, right? In terms of land animals, it's the most regal considered one of them. Just not just because of their size and strength, but how they operate and dominate and run on pride and stuff like that. So he's made to stand on his feet like a man, which is something that specifically happened to Nebuchadnezzar after God restored his mind to him, right? Mm-hmm. And a man's heart was given to it. What do you think that represents?
Heart of flesh.
Yeah, I mean, we have that in the New Testament, right? He takes away a heart of stone and gives us a heart of flesh, right? Mm-hmm. In the case of Nebuchadnezzar, he was taking this proud heart to think of himself like a god and how great he was taken from him, and he's humbled to think of himself just like a regular man now. And God, he would say, God gives the kingdom to whom he wills, and he sets up the basis of men to be rulers of kingdoms. So he looked at himself and said, essentially, I only have what I have because of God. So he was humbled, right? Right. So this is in the reign of his son Belshazzar when Daniel's saying this. And so that wouldn't have been that long afterward, because if you remember, Nebuchadnezzar was like that for 7 years. And so Nebuchadnezzar, or his grandson, I mean, they would have known this stuff about Daniel, and they would have known what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, because even in the end of Belshazzar's reign, if you go back to chapter 6, I think it's his mother or his grandmother is telling him about Daniel and his relationship to Nebuchadnezzar. So they would have known this, okay? So just like the other ones, we can assume if that first one's about Nebuchadnezzar, and it's like in the first vision Daniel gives you, he flat out tells Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold, right? Right. So we don't have to like stretch the imagination to be like, well, who's the next one then, right? Because we know history says Persia goes first, and we have right in the Bible that Persia sacks Babylon right there, so we know what's next, right? It's the same thing with this one, where it's just like it really obviously ties that to Nebuchadnezzar. Now you have these new theologians and eschatology buffs who are coming around, and this might not necessarily fit in with their theories, so they're like, they'll try to fudge that around. But if you understand, God's consistent, right? Like he very clearly tied the first one to Nebuchadnezzar. We're still in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. It's just his grandson is ruling, right? So he's very clearly tying this to Nebuchadnezzar again, right? And then he gets to the second one. So who can we assume the second one is?
Persian Medes.
Persia, okay. So what was the first thing we noticed about this bear? When you think of a bear, what do you think? What's the first word that comes in your mind when you think of a bear? In terms of animals, like when you think of lion, you think of like, right, ferocious or whatever, right? But like, what's that key word that you kind of just think of when you think of a bear?
Like it's big.
Big, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even have to prompt that. It's like that's the word that comes to your mind when you think of a bear. It's big, right? You might think of a lion as maybe even being more dangerous, but you think of a bear as being big, right?
Right.
And then it says it's raised up on one side. So here's a characteristic of a bear. It's big, and then this bear is raised up on one side. Any guesstimations on what that might represent?
Nope.
Yeah, we'll get into that later, but that's obviously a special trait to this bear, right? Okay. And then what else? What else does he got going on?
It had three
Yeah.
ribs in the mouth of it.
3 ribs in his mouth, right? When it comes to a prophecy, every time a number is mentioned, it's important. It's specific. So there's something about this bear is raised up on one side with 3 of something in his mouth, 3 ribs in between his teeth. And he says to get up and arise and devour much flesh, okay? So by the time we're through the end of the study, this is all going to make perfect sense to you. But those characteristics are very important because he's going to bring them in to talk about other people later on, okay? So, and when we get to Revelation, we're going to refer back to this stuff. So then the next one, he comes up when he says, lo, like a leopard. Now, what's the word that you think of when you think of a leopard?
Fast, stealthy.
I hear 2 words, stealthy and fast, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the thing about both of those things is quickness, right? You can't pounce on your prey if you're not stealthy, right? A leopard is smaller than a lion, but it doesn't get its animal. A lion's going to go after animals by brute force, where a leopard is going to pounce on you, right? And sometimes it's going to come up out of the tree and just jump on you. So he needs to be sneaky and he needs to be quick and decisive about what he does, right? Because he's not as powerful, right?
Right.
Now, what do we see about him?
That's 4 wings of a fowl.
4 wings. So every number is always important, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think wings might represent? Wings of a fowl.
Mm. Could be his reach
His reach.
as far as like being able to travel and
How far he's able to expand.
Yeah.
Okay, and then he also has 4 heads, right? What do you think 4 heads represent?
Those 4 generals.
That's specifically what they represent, but typically when you see the word head, if we know these are kingdoms, what do heads represent?
Military, like generals.
Think more simply, because you know it's generals, because we've all heard that before, right?
Right.
But think more simply about the word head. What does head say to you? Think of all these terms they're using the Bible.
Commander. Four different dominions, like 4.
And when we say head, who's the head?
The leader.
The leader, right? Mm-hmm. Who's the head? Who's the head of the body of Christ?
Christ.
Right? Who's the head of the house?
The Father.
Who's the head of a nation?
The king.
Who's the head? The king. Who's the head of an army? General, right? See, so we want to think and we want to take these terms and we want to own them in that meaning, because that meaning is going to permeate through the whole Bible, right? When you think about the head, like some of these things, and I want you to do this with beasts too and things like this, because it's like when you think about these things, you're going to find these terms in all kinds of other prophecies that you study, and you want to be thinking about these things because when these prophecies are interpreted for us, these things become clear, okay? And then you can go back and reuse those terms and other things and say, oh, what are they talking about there? Oh, because there's going to be stuff in the book of Revelation where we look at this beast and it has 7 heads and 10 horns and stuff like that, okay? Mm. So we see heads represents the leaders, right? Mm-hmm. And dominion was given to it. What is dominion?
Rulership.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Like government, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a domain is like an area of government, right? Mm-hmm. A dominion is like the authority of a government. It's the structure. It's the rulership of that government, right? It's the authority to rule that dominion. or that domain. Okay, so the words can be kind of interchangeably. A domain always means space, but dominion can mean rulership or the space that they rule. Okay, so I want to make that point to you because remember where we said kings and kingdoms are kind of the same word.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we have heads and dominions definitely separated, right?
Right.
Okay, so we want to make this point because there's going to be other prophecies where there are going to be things that represent heads and things that represent dominions, and we want to show those things as separate there, okay? And then the next one is going to be a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible. It had iron teeth. It devoured and brake into pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it and was diverse from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns, okay? So he says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up from among them a little horn, before which three of the horns, the first horns, were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in his eyes were eyes like the eyes of a man. This is important. And the horn had eyes like the eyes of a man. Okay? And a mouth speaking great things. Okay? As we get to Revelation, these little terms like this is like the eyes of a man. Is like, if it's a man, why does he just have the eyes of a man? Right? Why does it have eyes like the eyes of a man, right? Because he didn't say a mouth like a mouth of a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
He just said a mouth. But he has eyes like the eyes of a man. So there's something odd here, even if it is just talking about a man, okay? Now, it might just be talking about what he's seeing, so you don't always want to jump to those conclusions, but I'm pointing at these things because they're going to be more important later. So we see 10 horns, we see 3 horns plucked up, and we see some little horn with eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things, okay? We see its teeth. What kind of teeth does it have?
Iron.
Iron, right? So that's the fourth beast. And so if we have this third beast, what are we assuming this third beast is?
Greece.
Greece. And what are we assuming this fourth beast is?
Rome.
Rome. Okay. And remember, we see this, and we see the Ancient of Days set up, and it says 1,000 thousands ministered to him. Now, all this stuff is right in the book of Revelation. We'll get to that later. We'll probably circle back to this because it's not as important for discerning what this is saying right here until we get to the book of Revelation. But then we see, he said, he beheld even till the beast was slain, his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Okay? And that's concerning the rest of the beasts. So we know this beast is destroyed, given to the burning flame. The rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season of time. So if the beasts represent what?
Kingdoms.
Kingdoms. But this kingdom has its dominion taken away, but its life is prolonged for a season of time. What does that sound like to you? Was that, if you have to just imagine that in political terms, what does that look like?
You said in political terms?
Yeah, because we know dominion is a political, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the beast represents a kingdom and a dominion represents the authority of that kingdom, how would that play out? Let's say you're Iran, right? And I took away your dominion, but I allowed your kingdom to continue, your life to continue in that sense. What does that look like?
Like occupation, like
Right.
Like how Rome was over Israel in the time of Christ, like
Right, like they still had a nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember how they were threatened and they want to get rid of Jesus because they're like, lest they take away our place and our nation, right?
Right.
So you still had a territory and you still had a people and you even still had some government, right? But dominion was taken away. So what's really taken away is your authority to act with sovereignty, right?
Right.
You're under the authority. So it's like when Israel was first taken by Babylon before they actually sacked the city, right? They were paying tribute to the kingdom of Babylon, but they weren't allowed to just do whatever they wanted, right? And then when they rebelled against him, he just destroyed their city and took them captive. So what he's saying about this is that one of these beasts is going to get completely destroyed and his body given to the burning flame. The other ones are going to be allowed to remain, okay? Now, based on what we know about the fourth kingdom, what do we have to be looking for here about this fourth kingdom? What's different about the fourth kingdom than the other three?
They're diverse.
It's diverse from them, right? That's what it says here. But what do we know about our statue? What do we know about that fourth kingdom that's different from the other three?
It was mingled with clay. It was iron mingled with clay.
You start out like that?
No.
Okay. So there's two versions of it, right? So we want to be looking for two versions of this one.
Correct.
So we see this and we go, okay, this fourth kingdom that gets taken away, it gets taken away twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Destroyed twice, right? And so we see this too. It says, behold, I saw one like the Son of Man that came with the clouds of heaven and came to the, this is important, look at this, came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Okay? What does that sound like? I didn't hear what you said, Lakia.
Oh, I said the Trinity. Jesus coming to God the
The
Father.
Ancient of Days is the Father, right?
Yeah.
But notice that he's coming to him.
Mm-hmm.
But historically, what does that sound like?
When he ascended.
Right. See, people are going to see this and they'll be like, oh, that's the rapture, right? Because he's coming with the clouds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's not coming to us. He's coming to the Ancient of Days, right?
Right.
So which version of the kingdom is that? Of that fourth kingdom, is it the first one or the second one?
The first.
The first one, right?
Yep.
So their dominion is taken away in the first kingdom, and that's actually something Jesus specifically does in his ministry. And then he says, and there was given to him a dominion and glory and a kingdom, and a people of nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom shall not be destroyed. Okay? So we know that these nations and people are progressively coming to Jesus now, right?
Right.
So the kingdom's already come, and we're already being gathered to it, but it's ultimately going to have a final conclusion. So we see what's being said here, and we're seeing the first phase of it, but then there's going to be something like a second phase of that too. Okay. The other thing is we see that they had their dominions taken away and their lives were prolonged for a season of time. Was there still a Greek people in a kingdom after this, after Rome?
Yes.
Was there still a Persian people in a kingdom?
Yep.
Yeah.
Was there still a Babylonian people in a kingdom?
Yeah. So this is the time of the Gentiles fulfilled.
Right. It's not completely fulfilled.
But
right.
this is that time period, that season of
Yeah,
time.
I mean, they're going to continue to exist, but also when we get to the millennium, we want to think about that, because the Antichrist kingdom is going to be the main kingdom, and when Jesus comes to destroy it, he's not trying to destroy the peoples and their lands. He's just trying to destroy the Antichrist kingdom, right?
Right.
And then the rest of those kingdoms that were involved under basically the Antichrist power and dominion, he's going to allow them to live throughout the millennium. So that's kind of what we can get just by like looking at it and meditating on it, right? And I want to do that first before we get into what the angel tells him, just because we always want to just take the time, just think about it and like meditate on it for a bit, because that's really where God's going to connect a lot of dots. There's a lot of things in the Bible and in prophecy. The Bible just explains if you let it, but you'll want to get in the habit of just thinking about these things and looking for the consistency in the usage of these terms and things like that, and especially those paradigms and patterns and things like that. So let's get into now the angel. Daniel's grieved in the spirit, and the visions troubled him. Tyson, why don't you take us from 16? Just 16 to 27 should be fine.
Cool. Daniel chapter 7, verse 16. I came there unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me known the interpretation of the things. The great beasts which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the four beasts, which was diverse from all of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom, are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end.
Okay. So this angel's given an explanation of what happened. So let's see how this stuff matches up to what we were just thinking about, okay? So for starters, the 4 beasts are what?
Kings.
Kings. Remember how we were saying how the Bible doesn't necessarily differentiate between a king and a kingdom?
Correct.
Now it can differentiate between a head and a dominion, right? Because a head's not necessarily a king, and a dominion's not necessarily a kingdom. But a king and a kingdom are one and the same, okay? So that's why he says there are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth, and then the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, okay? So again, he's going to keep using that, plurality between a king and a kingdom. They're one and the same thing. And then he says, then I would know the truth. He's asking him now, okay, I get you. I know what these things are. And notice he's not asking for much explanation about that, because he already knows about 4 kingdoms that are coming, right, in a row. He's already had this prophecy. He's already interpreted it. So once he knows that the beasts are kingdoms, this is the first time the Bible really establishes that beasts are kingdoms, right? So once he knows that beasts are kingdoms, he doesn't even bother to ask about, well, what are these kingdoms? Because he knows about 4 kingdoms already, right? What he really wants to know is the 4th beast, which is diverse from the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured the pieces and stamped the residue of feet, and the 10 horns that were in his head, and of that which came up, and before the other 3 fell, even that horn that had eyes, and the mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. Because that's new. He already knows about these 4 successive kingdoms that are coming, right? Mm-hmm. But this stuff is new, with these 10 kings and the one that plucks up 3 kings. What is this about, right? So we see some things here that we are actually kind of familiar to us if we know history, because we have, look at these 2 metals here, iron and brass, right? What does iron represent to Daniel, and he already knows this?
That's wrong.
And what does brass represent?
Greece.
Greece. Okay, so check it out. His teeth were of iron, right? Mm-hmm. What does the teeth usually represent doing? Give you a hint, the word right here. Eating. Right, devour, right?
Yeah.
So if you think of that in terms of government, what do you think of the teeth? What do you think of devouring doing?
Conquering.
Conquering, right? That term you're going to see again and again, okay? Especially when you get in the book of Revelation. The devouring is conquering, right? Mm-hmm. When you think of nails, where are nails?
In your hands, the extremities of your hands.
Right. And what do you do with your hands?
You grab. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the mouth devouring represents conquering, what do you think nails of brass represent? What's the most basic thing you do with your hands?
Fight.
That's the most basic thing you do with your hands? You're a violent man, Tyson. Mike Tyson. What's the most basic thing you do with your hands?
Whole thing.
Whole thing, right?
So
some of them we love. They're not all our enemies.
Brandon fights all the time.
Hold things and involving nails. What does that sound like?
Like they grab it, they're holding it. Like
you're clutching it, right? And that's where your nails get involved, right? So check this out. Rome conquered the whole world, right? In their time, the civilized world. Why do you think it's held together, though, by brass? It's conquered by iron, but it's held by
Culture and
brass.
philosophy.
Say that again?
The Greek culture and philosophies.
Greek culture and philosophy, and what else? Something really specific. Think New Testament.
Government, politics, language.
Language, right?
Ah,
The Greek culture, philosophy, and language is what held the kingdom together. But the teeth, right, was the actually the short iron Roman swords of the Roman legion. And it's really interesting. Like, have you ever seen Roman legions? Have you ever seen how they march in formation? They actually stagger in a bunch of little triangles like teeth. Like, you should, yeah, I want to see if I can find one of these things. There was a video that I watched once. It was like a documentary about this, I think it was like Boethius or some like Irish person that they conquered. And it's like this. See how this is like this?
Mm.
Well, they would have these big armies and they just form a wall of a bunch of teeth like that. And a bunch of guys with these short iron swords, but really stocky, heavy shields, right? And you'd have these armies of like barbarians that are running at them and they're trying to jump over their shields with their axes and try to get them. And they're just a wall that's just stabbing forward. And they just keep coming forward like this. And what they do is they break into those lines and just isolate people and stab them around. Next thing you know, it's like you're broken up from the people around you, so you can't rely on each other's strength. And you're all just getting devoured in between these teeth. That's like their formation, okay? So that's Rome to a T. And then, of course, the Greek language had already spread through most of the empire Rome conquered, and they just let it keep spreading because why try to make them all speak Latin when the Greek language is already holding them together, right? You just need to control military power in the government. So, and then it says, so they break into pieces and stamp the residue with his feet. What do you think that represents here? Broken to pieces and stamp the residue with his feet. If I'm stamping you down with my feet, think biblical terms too. Stamping you down with my feet. What does that sound like I'm doing? I'm not just beating you up. I'm stamping you down with my feet.
right.
Like, this
I
is
just don't
just
got the words. Like, I'm visualizing it, but I just don't have the words.
so, like, biblically, I was thinking, like, you know, how Christ stamps the serpent as, crushing its head.
Right, under his feet, right? Remember he says in Mark, at the end of Mark, you will tread on serpents and scorpions, right?
Right.
So what does that represent? I mean, are we physically killing demons when we trample on serpents and scorpions?
No, it's like basically I want to say like converting them to what they say in Rome, do as the Romans do, basically.
Right. So dominate is the word I
Like dominant. Yeah, I was thinking that.
You know what I mean? And it's like when you think of stamping the revenue, it's like you're crushing their spirits, right? You're dominating them. You're just crushing them. And one of the ways the Romans would crush people is they tax them to death, right?
Right.
But they also broke them up because they broke up all these kingdoms into a bunch of different provinces, right? So you couldn't really have a strong united force against them. So this is truly Rome right here, right? But then notice this, he says, the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which come up, and before whom 3 fell, even that horn that had eyes. So this is what he's trying to figure out, right? He says, I beheld, and that same horn made war of the saints and prevailed against them. So he says this. So this is what Daniel is asking the angels, right? So notice he's basically just like, this is what I want to know about right here is this fourth, the horns and all that come out of that fourth kingdom, right? And he says, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth that shall be diverse from the other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth and tread it down and break it into pieces. Okay? Did Rome devour the whole earth? I mean,
No.
they would use that term in that day, right? That say they ruled the whole world, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, did Rome devour the whole earth?
No.
No. So this is something different, right? Now, notice that he says this: the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. You see that?
Mhm.
The 10 horns out of this kingdom, which means the beast is ancient Rome, right? But now there's 10 horns coming out of that kingdom, okay? And it says, these are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he will be diverse from the first and subdue three kings, okay? So these 10 horns are 10 kingdoms that arise out of that kingdom. What do you think that represents?
Well, in the previous vision, it's the 10 toes. So 10 kings out of the earth, out of the revived Roman Empire.
Okay. So those are those 10 kings in the last days, right?
Correct.
So they come out of the Roman Empire, which means what happened to the Roman Empire?
Broken up.
Broken up, right?
Mhm.
So we know that initial break was between the East and West. And do you know what happened to it? I mean, it was really more than the East and West, because if you think about it, the Eastern Roman Empire grew out, the whole Soviet Union grew out of that.
Mm-hmm.
The Western Roman Empire, out of that grew England, Germany, France, Spain, all these other countries, which took over big chunks of the world after that, right?
Right.
The East grew into Islam and the Caliphate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they took over all of, really, the top half of Africa and the Middle East, and then other big chunks of the world. Pretty much all the world was conquered by, and then if you remember, all these European countries went and basically took over all the rest of South America and Africa and everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the whole world was conquered by peoples, probably with the exception of like China and Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the whole rest of the world was conquered by nations that came out of the breakup of the Roman Empire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now all you need to do is get those different pieces to come together again, and now you have a Roman Empire that's taken over the entire world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are the big ones? I mean, if you think of all these different pieces, what are the biggest pieces of the Roman Empire?
England.
Like the 10 of today?
I mean, if you had to take the chunks of the Roman Empire today and what they were, what are they today? I mean, when you think about where the Roman Empire was.
Because they were, go ahead. They were in England. Definitely in England.
Sure. France.
Spain.
What is all that called now?
Europe.
Really, all
European
of Europe,
Union.
right? I mean, for the most part, like most of Europe was part of the western part of the Roman Empire. What's the eastern part mostly now?
Russia?
Like Turkey and North Africa.
Yeah, Russia's a big piece of it, but then Turkey and the Middle East is the other big piece of it, right? So if you took those three pieces together, just Russia, the Islamic countries, and then the European countries, that's enough to almost crush and dominate everything else in the world, right? That's a lot. You know, you have China and India that are pretty big holdouts, right? But I mean, that's a big chunk of humanity right there. So we see that, and so what you guys know what Chrislam is? You ever heard that term?
Yeah, I saw it. I actually was seeing it on your videos. With the, it's like I was seeing it before I even got into the Israelite movement, but it's like Christianity merging with Islam.
Right.
With Rick Warren and what is it called? Ecumenical movement.
Yep. And I mean that Bono, you know who Bono is, right? Rock star with the glasses.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. So he was one of the big proponents in starting that. He'd start doing his rock concerts, and he'd have like a headband on. And this was before the Coexist movement, and it had a Christian cross, a Hebrew star, and a Muslim crescent on it.
Yeah.
And that turned into Coexist after a time. So the ecumenical movement is really about merging these different pieces of the former Roman Empire together religiously, right? So we know there's going to be 10 of these kings, and we're not going to get into all the speculations as to why. We're just getting into what it says. But then we have another arise after them that will be diverse from the first and will subdue 3 kings. And he will speak great words against the Most High and wear out the saints of the Most High and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a dividing of time. How long is that?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. What do you think this is right here?
The Antichrist.
Right. So in that first vision or the first dream that Nebuchadnezzar had that Daniel interpreted, did we hear anything about the Antichrist in that dream or vision? Like the person of the Antichrist. I'm not talking about the kingdom.
No.
Okay. So now we're adding a layer to that, right? There's these 4 kingdoms, and with this last one has 2 parts to it. But now we have some specifics about those 2 parts. And that second part has 10 kings, and then this 1 king who plucks up 3 of the kings, and he speaks out against the Most High, right? So do we have anything about the words abomination of desolation or anything like that in here? No. So we have, but you see where it's starting to form. We're going to get a clearer picture as Daniel goes forward of what that abomination of desolation is, okay? He's speaking out against the Most High, right?
Right.
So based on some of the other things we'll talk about, let's look at this. He subdues 3 kings, so we assume that somehow he's going to subdue 3 of these 10 kings. We can speculate about that later, and then we see he speaks great words against the Most High. That's actually abomination of desolation. Then he says he wears out the saints of the Most High, which could be persecution, could be a number of different things. And then he says he thinks to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and dividing of time. When you hear the word times, I mean, I know we have times, and the dividing of times, but what other kinds of times have we talked about here? Someone banging pans?
No, don't sound like gunshot.
Banging cookie sheets together? Think about times. We've been talking about this a lot. What kind of times are we in?
End times.
We're in the end times, but what about here in the Jews? What times are they in?
The Gentile.
The times of the Gentiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're in the times of the Gentiles, and someone comes along and tries to change the times, what are they trying to do?
Change it back into rulership of Israel.
Right. And the times of the Gentiles, right?
Right.
See, a lot of people, again, they get you on that, oh, we don't want to be like Hitler with the Jewish conspiracy, right? But if you know the times that they're in, and this is still in those times, and this guy's trying to change times, then he's trying to take them out of the times of the Gentiles, because that's the times that they're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about laws? What do we know about this second kingdom? What laws are we under right now?
The laws of the Gentiles.
Well, that's the political laws, but I'm thinking more spiritual.
The laws of Christ.
Royal law.
Right, the royal law, the laws of Christ, right?
Right.
So sum that up for me. What's the laws of Christ?
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and loving your neighbor as you love yourself.
Okay, so if I'm trying to change laws, what am I trying to change the laws from?
From that to Mosaic law.
Right. See, people are always trying to figure out, like, how is he going to try to change times and laws? Is he going to reset the calendar? Is he going to do this? Is he going to make the week 10 days instead of 7 days? You hear all these speculations, right? But if you understand the times and laws they're under is the Gentile political sovereignty, right? And the new covenant, then changing the laws would change it back to the Jewish kingdom and the old covenant. That's changing times and laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what, when we get into Ezekiel and stuff like that, we're going to watch, because Ezekiel, like 43 through 47, is in the millennium, and he's going to be talking about how the Levites led all the people astray and how they're going to have to bear that shame throughout the entire millennium. because they led everyone astray because they're leading people back on the law. Okay. So what we have here is we have a little horn. Is he one of the 10?
No.
No, he's not one of the 10, right?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so he plucks up 3 of them, right? Does that sound like he's getting along?
Nope.
No, he's overturning them, right?
Right.
And we know we had iron mixed with clay. And who did the iron and clay represent?
Clay, Israel, the iron, Rome.
Right. Did they get along?
Nope.
No.
They were kind of like frenemies, right?
Mhm.
Right.
So you have somebody who's intermingled with them, who's trying to flip the board, right?
Right.
And so what you have here is somebody trying to basically cause the Jewish kingdom to reemerge. And if you understand, we know the physical, political kingdom, the material kingdom was taken away from them when Nebuchadnezzar sacked them, right?
Hmm.
When was the spiritual kingdom taken away from them?
When Christ came.
Right. Do you remember when he said those exact words? He said, the kingdom will be
Yeah.
taken from you and given to others besides you, so will give me the fruit thereof.
Yeah.
So he gives the political rulership to the Gentile kings in these 4 kingdoms in the times of the Gentiles. Notice there's 4 of them, right?
Mhm.
He gives the spiritual authority to interpret God's laws to the apostles who write 4 gospels.
Mm.
See that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go all the way back up to this because he says, Daniel spoke, and I saw a vision by the night, and behold, 4 winds upon heaven strove upon the great sea. What do 4 winds always represent in the Bible?
Wars?
No.
No.
All over the earth.
Right, every direction in the earth, right? So north, south, east, and west, right? The 4 points of the earth or the 4 winds of the earth is usually representing either coming from everywhere in the earth or going out to everywhere in the earth, okay? What does the great sea usually represent?
Gentiles.
Gentiles, right? So notice we're dealing with the political here, and we see the 4 winds striving upon the Gentiles, and you end up with 4 kingdoms, right? And then we're going to get to the Gospels, and you got 4 Gospels, and that's the reason why we have 4 Gospels, because they're going out to the Gentiles, okay? Because when we get down to Zechariah and Revelation, we're going to that number 4 is going to become important, okay? So just like the political reign went out to the Gentiles until that time came, right? And that time, the real time represents the second coming of Christ, right? That's when they're out from the Gentile authority, but not before that. Likewise, the gospel rules the earth until Christ comes back. Like the particulars of what he gave to the apostles and the apostolic teaching and the church government and all this stuff is in charge of the spiritual factors of the kingdom until Christ returns. And if he wants to change it at that time, have us do things different, he can, right? And he does change some things. He seals up vision and prophecy. There's no more prophets anymore. There's no more tongues. There's no more, you know what I mean? He changes things when he gets back. But for now, the way God set up the church and the way God set up the Gentile governments, he's ordained until he comes back. So this Antichrist, who's trying to change times and laws, who's a little horn, who pops up among the 10 and uproots 3, what kind of ethnicity do you think he might be?
Jewish.
You think he might be?
Yeah.
We don't know that concretely, right? But maybe we could speculate a little bit in that direction, right?
Mhm.
And so then we see the judgment sits, and they will take away his dominion and consume and destroy it to the very end. So what we see is when you see right here where it said, behold, thrones were cast down, the Ancient of Days did sit, right? And the books were open. And then we see this judgment was sitting, and they take away his dominion to consume and destroy it. All this language we're going to get into more deeply when we get into the book of Revelations, but all this stuff is what's going on behind the scenes in heaven as the book of Revelation is rolling out. And it actually starts in like Revelation chapter 4 and goes all the way to like chapter 21. But you just keep seeing it pop up because it's happening in eternity while all this stuff is playing out on earth.
Mm.
What does Dan's name mean?
Dan, it means
Does it mean huh?
judge.
Okay.
Right. So And we see the kingdom is a dominion, and the greatness of the whole kingdom under heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Okay? Notice it says the kingdom, the Most High, and serve him, right? But the saints are the government, the administration of the kingdom, right? But the king is God himself. Okay? So that's what we have now. Now we've just overlaid this on top of our four kingdoms, and now we have this additional info about that last kingdom, where it's like you're going to have these 10 kings that arise for that phase 2, right? We're going to have iron mixed with clay, which seems to be an allegiance of Rome and the Jews, right? And then we're going to have this little guy who pops up and tries to end the times of the Gentiles and end the new covenant, right? That's his goal. So now we're going to go to this next one. This is going to be the next one he does under Belshazzar. And then we're going to develop that a little further. And this will be the last one we study today. So let's just start in verse 3, Tyson. And then to verse 14.
Daniel chapter 8.
Chapter 8, yep, 3 to 14.
All right, Daniel chapter 8, verse 3. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram and brake his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth the little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? We're going to 13, right?
14.
Or 14. And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
Okay. So again, we're going to see the same pattern. Now, in the first dream, Nebuchadnezzar has the dream and Daniel interprets. In the second dream, Daniel has the dream and then the angel interprets. Now we're in the third dream. We have Daniel having a dream and then the angel's going to interpret again. Okay. So we see. He says he stood before the river, and a ram has 2 horns. Do you know where Shusham is in the province of Elam?
No.
So Elam would have been the Semitic people that preceded the Persians, but this was under Babylon's rule at that time. But that's where he was in the dream. He was actually in Persia. Okay. So remember, this is all before Persia comes in and takes over, okay? And he says, "Then I lifted up my eyes, and behold, there stood up in a river a ram that had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last." Does that remind you of anything that we read?
Yeah.
What's that?
The little horn that came out of the tent, that came after the 10, right?
Yeah, I could see how that'd be similar, but I was thinking more about what kingdom are we in here, do you think?
The river of the Ram is, that would be the Medo-Persians, right?
Yeah. So what did that match up with the last vision we just saw? Which animal?
The bear.
The bear. Do you remember the first thing we read about the bear?
Yeah, he had teeth.
He was standing up on one side.
Oh yeah, one side.
He was standing lifted up on one side, right?
Right.
Notice how it says, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So this one's got two horns, and one of them's higher than the other, just like the bear's lifted up on one side, right?
Mm.
You know historically what that represents?
No.
So do you know, between the Medes and the Persians, who conquered Babylon?
Cyrus.
Persian.
It wasn't Cyrus. It's in Daniel. I'm gonna just see if you guys can guess.
Darius?
Right.
Yeah.
So what was Darius Persian or Mede?
He was a Mede, right?
Yep. So Darius the Mede conquers them, right? So historically, the Medes were actually ones who put the alliance together with Babylon to conquer Nineveh, and then they put the alliance together with the Persians to conquer Babylon. So they were the shot caller in the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then as the kingdom goes on, actually Darius, who was really the big visionary behind all this, he dies, and pretty much the Persians take over after that. You don't really have Mede kings. I mean, they're still prominent in the empire, you know, in terms of just being part of the administration and whatnot, but like the Persians definitely come to dominate and be the bigger section of the empire. So that's why the beast is, or that's why the bear's lifted up on one side, and that's why it has one horn that's bigger. And then it says, you know, the higher one came up last. So the of the Medes and the Persians came to be more powerful later, but they ended up being much more powerful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we have two horns. That's the Medes and the Persians, right? You have basically two kings, right, in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, "I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward." So if it compares to the bear, what does that sound like?
The three ribs in his mouth.
The three ribs in his mouth, right? Because what did we just say devouring means?
Conquer.
Conquer, right? So it says, so no beasts, that's kingdoms, right, might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So those are the big conquests they had. And if you know where the Medes and the Persians were, they basically had from what was today like northeastern Iraq all the way over into Iran, but they also already had a bunch in the east. They had big chunks of like Central Asia and northern India and Pakistan, stuff like that. And then they push, it says westward, northward, and southward. So that's where they grow from there, okay?
Right.
So it becomes this great big kingdom, and that's the point. That's how the bear gets big, right? He has these three conquests, and that's the three ribs in his mouth. Okay? And so then he says, I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth. So if this is Medo-Persia, who's coming from the west?
Greece.
Greece, right? And it says, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So again, if the beast is the kingdom, the horn is who?
King.
King, right? So we see how we're establishing a pattern, right? We know kings and kingdoms are the same thing, but they're represented in these beasts as like the horn's the king, and the beast is the kingdom, right? So we know this is the Greeks, and the notable horn is Alexander the Great, right?
Yeah.
And he came up to the ram that had two horns, which I saw standing by the river, this river in by Elam, by Persia. And he ran into him in the fury of his power, and I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. That just means like rage. And he smote the ram and broke his two horns, and there was no power in the ram that could stand before him. And he cast him on the ground and stamped on him. In other words, he dominated him, right?
Yep.
And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So what's that signify?
The death of Alexander.
Right. And when did he die?
like 29, 30 years old.
He was young, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much as soon as he got done conquering the Persian Empire, he died.
Right.
Like he took it all over, pushed, like conquered every last part of it, right? And then went back to Babylon and died. So it says when he was strong. So as soon as he had reached that point of the peak of his power, he just died. He went out on top, like Jordan the first time he retired. And then it says the great horn was broken, and for it, in other words, and for that great horn, came up four notable ones towards the four winds of heaven. Now, do you remember the four in the last beast? Remember the number 4? Mm-hmm. We had 4 wings and 4 heads, right?
Right.
So what did we say the wings represented?
Like being worshipped, like spiritual.
Well, that was in the Babylonian one. Yes. But in the leopard, we talked about those representing the extent of its direction.
The extent of right?
Yeah. And so the 4 heads represented the actual 4 generals, right?
Right.
Now here we have 4 notable horns instead of 4 heads, and the 4 winds of heaven instead of the 4 wings. Got it? Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a breakup of 4 kingdoms. And then out of one of them came forth a little horn. Now we had a little horn come up out of the beast, right? The Roman beast, right? Mm-hmm. Now we have a little horn coming up out of one of Alexander the Great's 4 generals, right? How can that be both? First of all, is this the same horn? What does he do? He waxed exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. See how he has 3 conquests like the other one does? Mm-hmm. That's going to become important when we get to Revelation. Then he says, wax great even in the host of heaven, cast down some of the hosts of the stars to the ground. What does that sound like?
Satan being cast out.
The dragon, remember, with his tail? We'll get into that later too. And then he magnified himself to the prince of the host. Remember how the other horn speaks out against the Most High? Mm-hmm. So you see he's the same horn, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but now he's coming out of Greece instead of Rome. So how can those both be true?
I'm thinking about the nails, the hands and the nails. So the Roman Empire had Greek influence. Mm-hmm. So they were mingled together.
And we're kind of narrowing it down too, right? So he's coming from the Roman Empire. So let's look up the Roman Empire.
They kinfolk.
And here's our Roman Empire, right? Now let's look up our Greek Empire. Here's a Greek Empire. So if I've got my Greek Empire here, notice that goes from Greece and you go straight south to about Libya and goes east, right? Mm-hmm. And I've got my Roman Empire here. All this is not part of that Greek Empire, right? Mm-hmm. So now we've just narrowed it down to this half of the Roman Empire that he comes from. See how we do that? Because they overlap, right? Because the Greek Empire goes way over to the east. So now we're down to this area right here, right?
Yeah. So
now we're narrowing down where he comes from. He's from one of Alexander's 4 generals, and then he's also from Rome, from the Roman Empire, right? Mm-hmm. So we have those 2 things. We know where they overlap is basically between the Middle East, Egypt, Greece, and Turkey, right? That's pretty much all we have to work with, right? You can probably go as far west as maybe like Syria, or far east is Syria in the Middle East. Far south is Egypt. Far west is Greece and Turkey. Those are your choices, okay? So now we're going to look at the next thing he says about him. He says, he waxed very great. The little horn came, and he waxed exceedingly great towards where? What directions?
South, east,
south,
pleasant land,
and east, and towards the pleasant land, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're going to narrow it down even further. So if we got, remember we said the furthest east he can be is over here, right? Mm-hmm. If I went south and east from here, where would I be? Am I in the beautiful land?
No.
If I went south and east from Egypt, am I in the beautiful land? What's the beautiful land?
Israel.
Oh, Israel. Yeah.
Holy Land, right? The Promised Land, right? So if I went south and east from Egypt, would I be there?
No.
Mm-mm.
If I went south and east from the Middle East, would I be there?
Nope.
Now we've just narrowed it down even further. If I went south and east from Turkey, would I be there?
Mm-hmm.
If I went south and east from Greece, would I be there?
Yeah.
So we just narrowed it down to Greece and Turkey, didn't we?
Yep.
There's your region. He's got to come from right here, right? If he were to get there by Greece, from Greece, how would he have to get there?
By ship.
Right. There's no land connection, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If he were to get there from Turkey, he could get there by land, right?
Yep.
We'll see if that comes into play later on, okay? But right now, we know he's coming from this section right here, heading towards that, south and east towards the beautiful land. That's all I did to come up with my theories about where the Antichrist come from. So we know that. And then we look at some of the stuff that he does. So we know he casts down, it says he waxed great even to the host of heaven. What does the host of heaven you think represent?
The angels.
Angels. And cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped on them. What does stamped on mean again?
Dominate.
Dominates the other angels. Not only does he get these angels to rebel against God, but once they have, he's gotten them to completely to be under his dominion, right? Completely dominates them. And then he says he magnifies himself up to the prince of the host. That means he makes himself equal to the Messiah. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
He's making himself equal to the Messiah. And then it says by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and in the place of his sanctuary was in the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And then it says, and a host was given to him. What do we say a host represents?
Angel.
Angels, okay. Against the daily sacrifice by reason of the transgression, and it cast down truth to the ground. And it practiced and prospered. So is that easy to understand? I'm gonna be honest, that doesn't sound like something that's plain and simple to understand.
No.
I don't fully understand what that means. I know there's other things that are going to say that he causes craft to prosper in his hand. A host was given him against the daily sacrifice. This is what I'm going to look at this and interpret this as being. And I'm just going to cheat. I'm going to cut to the chase. The host that stands against him, preventing him from doing the abomination of desolation, is Michael and his angels. But at the time of the desolation, Michael gets out of the way. He's the receiver that gets out of the way. So that's probably what the host has given him against this daily sacrifices, basically saying that Michael allows him to do the abomination of desolation by reason of transgression. And the transgression is the transgression of the Jews, which God allows them to go under this punishment through the Antichrist, and they're reaping what they sow. So if you remember in Jesus' ministry, he says, I came in my own name, and me you did not receive. Another will come in his own name, and him you'll receive.
Right.
So I think Michael is under orders to get out of the way and let the Antichrist do what he does as punishment for the Jews for doing what they did towards Christ. And that's how they're supposed to learn their lesson. And the ones who realize this is our sin that's caused this, repent and run away to the desert, right? And it cast truth to the ground, and it prospered. Are we living in a time where truth is cast to the ground?
Yeah.
I mean, postmodernism, right? There is no truth, right?
Right.
So then it says, I heard one speaking, another saint, and a certain spake that spoke, how long shall the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice, transgression, desolation, and both the sanctuary and host to be trodden underfoot? And he said it to be unto 2,300 days, and the sanctuary will be cleansed. Do you know about how long that is?
A little over 6 years.
Yeah, it's a little over 6 years. So what seems like is going to happen here is, one is, just going to tell you guys, this has a dual fulfillment too, like everything. The first fulfillment is this is going to be under Antiochus Epiphanes, and we'll get more into those in a later prophecy. And the second one is going to be the Antichrist. But if you can imagine, it's trodden underfoot, and then you have the transgression, desolation, or the abomination of desolation. And when we get to Revelation, we're going to find out that in Daniel's 70th week, there's 3.5 years of it being trodden underfoot, and then the abomination of desolation happens. And it probably stops shy of the end of the 70 years, or end of the 7 years, probably when Jesus touches down the Mount of Olives and splits the mountain in two. That's probably when, it stops, and then it's going to start to get cleansed. and then the rest of the time Jesus is carried out like his physical conquest and stuff. That's just my guess. So anyway, so that's Daniel's dream, and now we're going to get to the interpretation of it. We have 16 through. Let's just get to 16 through 26, Tyson.
Cool. Daniel chapter 8, verse 16. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is in between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and holy people, the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it.
Okay, even after the angel explains it, he still doesn't know what's going on, right? He's just astounded. But he's going to get a few more, and he's going to get more and more details on this, right? So compare that to what we said, okay? So we know the angel talking to him is Gabriel. Mm-hmm. And then he says, I will make thee know for the last time, the last end of the indignation, okay? The indignation really means the outpouring of God's wrath. We see the transgression and the transgression of desolation, but the indignation is God's response to it. Indignation is just another word for wrath. And so, where was I here? He says, for the time appointed, the end shall be, okay? Notice he says, at the time of the end shall be the vision. So there are people that theorize, and I think there might be some truth to this, that there's something like Alexander's conquest between Grecia and Persia that goes on right before the end, right before the Antichrist rises. Can you think of something that might be kind of like that?
Peace in the Middle East.
That would be kind of like when Alexander's conquest is done, right?
Right. So
we do have this horn going south and east and toward the beautiful land, right? Do you know a future prophecy about Persia being involved in this? Pretty famous prophecy in Ezekiel. You know the Gog-Magog prophecy?
Yeah.
38. So Persia is one of the main actors in that, and they're probably like the front end of it. Whereas like the power base is probably more like Russia, North Korea, maybe even China. But Turkey's like the main front line of it, right? So if Grecia, do you know what, when they said Grecia back then, do you know what they meant by Grecia in terms of territory?
Like Turkey?
They meant Turkey and what today is Greece. That whole area surrounding the Aegean Sea was considered Grecia. Because Javan, who was the father of the Greeks, wow, apparently type in Javan and rhinoceros popped up.
I wasn't expecting that.
No, so you got to be careful what you Google sometimes too, because anyways, so you've got Javan is right over here, and that's where he started, and then his sons all populated these islands and the rest of this area over here. So it's really, this whole area was considered Grecia. So you got Western Turkey and then Grecia. So when I say he came from here, it could either be Greece or it could be Turkey pretty equally, because that was always considered Grecia. Okay. So where are we? So there could be something like this, and I've considered that this is how I think World War III is going to play out. I personally think Turkey is playing both sides of this thing, and what they're going to do is they're going to enter in on right after, like, us and Russia have nuked each other and everything. They're going to enter in and basically be the stop, kind of like we jumped in at the very end of World War I and basically determined which side was going to win, because we came in fresh, after they were all wore out, and kind of like how we came in World War II after Russia had almost exhausted themselves and were starting to break the German lines and whatnot, and we came in and cleaned up, right? I think that's what Turkey's going to do in World War III. I think they're going to wait till us and Russia have nuked each other, and then they come in and they stand up to Persia and the other Middle Eastern countries that are invading, and they just take over the Middle East real quick and protect Israel and Saudi Arabia, and that's how they get control. That's my opinion. So that would be how that repeats itself, and then out of that, the Antichrist is going to rise, but we don't really know who he is until these 10 kings get together and put together like a new world order, right? These 10 kings are going to get together and establish like a new system of government that's it's like a new United Nations, right? And they did that after World War I with the League of Nations, and then that failed. Then after World War II, they did the United Nations, and when World War III comes, that's going to fail. So they're going to try to form another new world order, like a new United Nations with some real power behind it. And you're going to have these 10 kings. And what's going to happen once that happens is that's the Antichrist is going to utilize that piece to come to power and take over the Middle East. So we see the rough goat is Grecia. That we know about the first king. That was pretty obvious. Then he stands up, and the 4 kingdoms stand up out of that nation, but not in his power. Okay. So the 4 wings of 4 kingdoms, the 4 heads of the 4 kings. And then in the latter time of their kingdom, notice he's saying the latter time of their kingdom. He's not saying the latter time of Rome. He's saying the latter time of their kingdom. When the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. What do you think understanding dark sentences is?
Like occult stuff.
Yeah. There's nothing like that in the Bible. But yeah, another thing I thought it might be, what other kind of sentences are written in the dark?
Like parables?
Yep, that's another kind. Jesus talks about those things done in the dark, proclaim. So maybe he even has an understanding of secrets,
Right.
What about code?
Like binary code?
Yeah, like computer code. Couldn't that be considered a form of dark sentences? And we're all using all this stuff, right? But do we really see the code going on behind the scenes?
No.
I mean, isn't it kind of like a secret code that's really controlling all the stuff that we're doing right now?
Right.
So I've thought about a cult, and that's probably true as well. But what if he's somebody who just understands computer code really well? And the power that you can control with computer code, right?
Right.
Because I think there was something in like Psalms or Proverbs where he talks about dark sayings or something like that. Oh, there we go. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old to understand the proverb and the interpretation of the words of the wise and their dark sayings, right? So it is parables, but a parable is a form of code, right?
Right.
So what if, and I think both of those things are also true. He understands parables. So he probably understands a fair amount about the scriptures. He probably understands occult. But what if on a practical angle, he also really understands computer code? And that's where I'm leading with this because I just got done interpreting the whole book of Revelation. And like, where it says, him who has wisdom, calculate the number of the beast.
Right.
the word that they use for calculate is it actually means compute. And it was describing something that they would use to tally really quick, almost like an abacus that was used in the Middle East. It wasn't an abacus, but it was a similar system like that, which would have been a predecessor to like a computer or an actual calculator. So I have a theory that they were prophesying computers and computer code, and that's why the mark of the beast is going to be all about, having computers that dominate how people trade and everything like that. So that's theory, though. I want to kind of speculate little, but not too much until we get to more on what is actually said, right? So we see in the latter time of the kingdom when the transgressors come full, a king of fierce countenance. So remember how he talks about that horn that was more stern than its fellows? Here he talks about a fierce countenance, right? And the other one talks about a stern face. So he understands dark sentences, and he's of fierce countenance, or he's stern. Most of the things, this is interesting because I've seen videos on this, and I'm like, most of the stuff, when you think of a stern face, what do you think of a stern face man?
Putin.
Why?
Because he has no emotion. He's like, he wants to present strength, even like, you ever see him do like regular stuff and he always has his shirt off and just wants to be a super tough guy.
Yeah. He's coming out of power, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's got Parkinson's.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, you described it though, as like he shows little emotion, right? That's what a stern-faced man is. Look at that. I typed in stern-faced.
Right.
You understand?
First one that comes up.
Man.
Thank you.
Figured out the mysteries. But another one was somebody who doesn't cry, right? And I watched this thing, and he definitely does qualify as a stern-faced man, but he's old and almost out of it now.
Right.
Another guy who doesn't cry? Trump.
Yeah.
He said that in interviews that he never really cries. And it's just like, but he smirks and kind of jokes and laughs a lot and stuff. So I don't know if they'd really count him as a stern-faced man. But a stern-faced man, stern usually means serious, right? A serious-faced man who doesn't play around, right? He's not a lovable guy. He's not a jokester. So it's something that we want to keep in consideration, because that's twice that's come up. And Little Horn and this guy, he's known for having a stern face. And then he's known for being proud and boastful, which Trump also is. And I had thought of this, like, the only way I could, let me put it this way. If Trump moved to Greece or Turkey, that would send up a red flag with me, because he's boastful, proud. What's another thing that this guy does? He says his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. This is interesting. Not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people, right? And through his policy, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. What does that sound like?
Legislation.
Right. Policy is legislation, right? What's craft to prosper?
Like a trade.
Right. Craft, right? So I'm gonna skip all the way forward to Revelation 18 when we talk about the harlot, the mystery Babylon, and we talk about all the musicians and the pipers and trumpeters will be no more found in you, or a millstone, or all this stuff, and then it talks about all the precious stones, pearls, fine linen, silk, wood, brass, and marble, right? So you have all these materials that people are getting. And then it says every shipmaster and company's ships are whaling, so that's all the people that are shipping it. And then it talks about like all this stuff, a light of a candle shall no more shine in thee. Talks about the merchants being great men. And then I'm looking for, maybe it was 17, bear with me. Yeah, because it mentions craftsmen.
Yeah, you just missed it. It's in that chapter. Go back to the last chapter you're in.
17? Oh, this is the one that I was in.
Yeah, it's verse 22.
Musicians, pipers, and no craftsman. And no craftsman of whatsoever craft he shall be. So this is talking about, it talks about craft prospering his hand. We're talking about manufacturers, right? People who build stuff, make stuff, construction, technicians, people who design things, right? Like, he's causes the economy to prosper, right?
Right.
So, like, did Trump's policies cause our economy to prosper?
Yeah.
I mean, you would have to be pretty anti-Trump to not say his. I mean, here, look at.
Yeah, the economy's been booming.
I'm gonna go. He got into power 2016 through 2020. Okay, look at this. Stock market. 2016 to 2020. There was a stock market in 2008, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a stock market in 2016, right? Remember Jonathan Kahn and these people talk about how there's going to be an economic crash in 2015?
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
It didn't.
The opposite, right? I mean,
Yeah.
look at these charts. Look at this. This isn't. I lived through the '08 crash, right? This is where it was right here. This is where the economy was in 1998, and then it crashed after 9/11, and then it got back up to about the same spot, and then it crashed again, right? Now look at 2008 to the present. How the heck does the stock market go up that much? And then we even throw coronavirus at it, and that wrecks everything real good, you think, right?
Right.
Yet somehow, look at this. This is just this year. It's like they did everything to try to destroy Trump's economy. And I'm telling you, if the economy crashes after this, Trump will come right back as president. Because look at this. This is hold on. I got to find out where it busted. Okay, so this is where it busted in February, and then it came completely back. Like right now, it's higher than it was when it crashed.
Right.
In 8 months. But look at when it crashed in '08, how long it took to come back. So here's 2001 and here's 2008, right? And it took from about 2008 to 2016 to come back. See how it took 8 years to come back?
Mm-hmm.
And then with Trump, look at this. It rose, and then it dipped, and then 30,000 points. Back here, the whole entire stock market, the highest ever been, both these times, about 15,000, 16,000 points. Now it's up to 30,000 points. And it took 100 years to get to 15,000 points. From back here, it was like 3,000 points. So it took 75 years to grow by, from 3,000 to 15,000 5 times, and then it doubled again in just 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's causing craft to prosper. Like I said, he's got to move to here for it to work. But the Antichrist is going to do something like that, right? Where it's like he sets the policies and he makes the changes, and all of a sudden everything starts booming, okay? So we know that he's got a stern face. Let's go back to our chapters. We also know that his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Okay? Something or someone helps him. What are some ideas that we might have about what might help him?
Satan.
Satan himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's another thing, though?
Like,
If he's into the occult, if dark sentences are the occult, then that could help, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else? In another prophecy, it says he comes to power with the help of a small people.
Israel.
Right. Now, Israel has a lot of technology, a lot of science, a lot of computer science and stuff like that. So dark sentences, that's where another, computer code, right? If you know computer code, can you manipulate the stock market and currency?
Yep.
Yeah,
Can you
absolutely.
cause craft to prosper with IT and software and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Especially if you have policies, right? If you have policies, it just breaks up software companies and makes room for a bunch of other companies to come in, or gives power to some software companies, but then other people can use it and to make money off of it. I mean, there's stuff that could happen right there. So we see these features about him. We see a fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. So he gets help from somewhere. He's just a guy, but he gets help from somewhere. It says he will destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and destroy the mighty and the holy people. See how it separates those? The mighty and the holy people. Okay. So Who do you think Daniel's thinking the holy people are? When he's hearing this, mind you, he doesn't understand it. But who do you think Daniel is thinking the holy people are?
Israel.
Right. Does Daniel know about the church?
No.
No.
No, he has no clue that the church is coming, right? Everything he's hearing, he's reading Israel into this. And most Christians do too, because it was written to Daniel and it seems to be about his people. But we're going to find out that God is going to call in different prophecies in Daniel, his people, his people. So when it talks about saints and the holy people, it's not necessarily talking about his people. Otherwise, God would say your people. Okay? But we see the mighty. So the Antichrist prospers against the mighty and destroys them and the holy people. But what do we know? What do we know that he does already? Who's he wear out?
The saints.
The saints of the Most High, right? So who's that?
This is carnal Israel.
Right, the saints of the Most High, right? So what you're seeing is the Antichrist with the help of, this is how I interpret this, with the help of the Jews and ultimately Satan, because it's the unbelieving Jews, the same kind of people that persecuted Christ, destroy wonderfully, and he destroys the mighty. In other words, he takes dominion over these other strong nations, and then the holy people, he wears out the saints of the Most High, okay? And then everyone lets him get away with it because his policy causes craft to prosper. And when people are making money, they're willing to turn a blind eye to a lot of evil, aren't they?
Yeah.
And then when he gets to that point, he magnifies himself in his heart. And it says, by peace he shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but be broken without hand. So now here's another big factor about this guy. He's broken without hand, which means he can't be killed by a human, right? But he's going to stand up to the Prince of Princes. Who's that?
Christ,
right? So he gets broken without hand when he stands up to the Prince of Princes. And we also know there's the transgression of desolation. So we're getting closer to seeing exactly what the abomination of desolation is, right? Do we see any mention of the temple?
No.
Specifically, no, we don't, right? What we do see is a daily sacrifice, so we know it's something having to do with the temple, right? And so we see a desolation, a transgression of desolation, something having to do with taking away the sacrifice and standing up against the Prince of Princes. So that's how much we have about this guy. So we're learning more about what he does, and we're getting closer to what this abomination of desolation is, but we haven't quite nailed it down yet. Like what is specific? Like how do we get from here to what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians, where a guy stands in the temple and claims that he's God, right? And so that's what we're moving forward to. But do you see how he's starting to he's setting your paradigm first, understanding these four kingdoms in the times of the Gentiles. Now understand what each kingdom will do. Now understand what the Antichrist will do. We're starting to get into what he'll do, right? And so all these little symbols and stuff are going to come into play when we get into the book of Revelation, because not just what the Antichrist does, but what these other beasts and kingdoms do help us interpret what is being said in the book of Revelation. So we're still kind of learning how God speaks in terms of it. We're learning to understand dark sentences, right? We're learning to understand the parables and the meanings of, how God is going to use different symbols and different words to mean these other things. And then it's going to start to get more and more succinct about what the Antichrist does and more specific in time. We know that almost for 7 years he is polluting the sanctuary by trotting it down underfoot, and then by taking the sacrifice away and standing up to God. But we don't have a specific abomination of desolation event, like what causes what are we looking for, right? And we're looking for what we're looking for based on what Jesus said. So we'll leave that there, and don't feel bad if you don't understand, because Daniel had all this, and he was just like, but none understood it. Right? He's just like, I'm with you guys. I'm hungry for more, but I don't know what yet. So we'll leave it there, and then what we have after this is 9 is one prophecy, and that's going to be about Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. So it's going to be another form of interpreting the times of the Gentiles. Let's read that one, and then I want to get into Jeremiah 25 as well, because he is quoting he's talking about Jeremiah's prophecy that he read it, and that's where he's coming up with this. So those two will go hand in hand. And we probably won't read the whole thing, but we'll kind of get a piece of an understanding of Jeremiah's prophecy and the context and whatnot. and then get back into Daniel's. And then the following week we'll do actually 10 through 12 is actually all one prophecy. And 10 is really, it's really Gabriel talking to Daniel about him and Michael. And then he's going to tell you about how he, what he did between Greece and Persia, because now they're in the Persian Empire, or what he did with the Persians, and now what he's going to do with Greece. And then he's going to go forward and he's going to talk about those, what happened after Alexander's empire breaks up. And he's going to get into all those details, and that's going to bleed into the future. And then we're going to start to talk about the Antichrist there. And then chapter 12 is going to talk about what happens after the Abomination of Desolation. So by the end of that, that'll be pretty specific. So Daniel 9 and Jeremiah is talk about the 70 weeks of years, basically the end of the times of the Gentiles, and that's where we get that 7-year period clarified. And then the next one is going to talk about when in that 70-year period the Abomination of Desolation takes place and what exactly it is. Okay. So again, it wasn't meant to be a simple snapshot where we just look for the term Abomination of Desolation. God wanted his people to comprehensively study Daniel, get that frame of mind, because he was going to reveal to his people the revelation. And you need to get this in order to get the revelation. There's a lot of other prophecies that work into it, but if you don't understand Daniel, you will not understand what Revelation is talking about. Okay.
Gotcha.
So that's a lot, but I mean, it's we're just doing building blocks here. So a lot of this stuff, we're going to study this, and then we're going to get into Paul's teachings, and then we're going to just kind of just set this aside for now. And then when we get back in the Revelation, we're going to be referring back to this, but we'll have all the links right in the Power Bible that is going to catch most of the stuff. And literally, you can just go back and be like, oh, let's talk about this part. Oh, let's talk about this part. And then we're going to start weaving in other prophecies and stuff like that later, because there's lots of, like, if we were to get into all the different prophecies to get into this, it'd probably be like a 2-3 year study. But what we're going to do is we're going to get you a framework. And then if you're taking things forward and you're reading other prophets, you're reading Zechariah, you're reading Daniel, you just start matching this stuff up. And maybe if we keep on, if we are able to do this for years, maybe we'll just go through the whole book of Zechariah or Ezekiel or whatever, and get into some of this. But I know from just studying this one-on-one with one other guy, sometimes you just get reading that stuff and it gets dry, because there's a lot of stuff that's just talked about ancient history. And I am limited in my knowledge of what was happening at that time. And they talk about all these cities that I'm like, I don't even know where that city is. It's just it's dust now,
Right.
And so it's kind of hard. So I want to kind of equip you guys to do some of that reading on your own. But we'll probably at some point in time get into Joel and Zechariah and Micah and Ezekiel. Those are going to be the big ones. And then probably Hosea and Isaiah. There's a lot, but I'll try to cherry pick stuff that is clear and relevant based on the stuff we've already studied. All right.
Cool.
All right. So yeah. So for next week, let's just look at Daniel 9 and then Jeremiah 25, and then do this too. Tyson, do you have a Power Bible? I know, Michael, you have one, right?
Yeah.
No, he might give me the link and everything. I just haven't downloaded it yet, but
Okay.
I use different software. I got this little app that I use, and
Try to do a word study on 70 years, because there's other prophecies that involve 70 years that we're going to, once we understand how Daniel interprets the 70 years from Jeremiah, we're going to see if there's going to be some relevancy with these other prophecies about 70 years. All right.
cool.
All right. One of y'all want to close us out with prayer?